You are live.
We are here at House Education, February 11th, 2025, for a committee discussion. I included sort of the high level of sort of moving forward in terms of cost containment and other things. But to really kind of set the stage here, so over lunch, Representative Taylor said to me, "Do you have a timeline in mind here?" And he is the second person to ask me that today. And we have a little bit of a TikTok situation. Got a legislative process that requires a certain timing. And I guess what I would like to start talking about with the whole committee is, and I want to be clear, this is not meant to be any sort of initial, like, we're never paying attention to the governors, but when that bill comes, it will probably help us with a framework. But there is sort of so many big unanswered questions that I think it would be great if we could at least start consolidating around smaller answerable questions and smaller answerable strategies with an eye toward what we can do this year. Perhaps part of it is advancing that agenda. Part of it might be just like people have demanded that we start going after cost savings, and we start doing that. I think we need to think about achieving scale. We need to look at high cost drivers, regardless of what ends up coming out of governance. And of course, I'll just tell you that I'm pretty sure Ways and Means is a little bit in the same position, that this is deep, hard stuff that takes a lot of time, and they're still digging through data to figure out the funding portion of things. So,
Can I just throw one other?
yeah,
Equity.
I mean, you please just make sure we have that in mind.
As a guiding, that's what I think, as a guiding.
So what I would like to see is if we've got some ideas, strategies, and whatnot that we can coalesce around. Meanwhile, yes.
Class size.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe we'll start.
Oh my
Do you want
God,
me to write
somebody
down?
raised it.
Yes. Okay. No, I don't want to necessarily jump right into a big brainstorm,
Yeah.
but it will ultimately become. Let's talk first about cost drivers.
Do you want me to?
That'd be good. And so I would just say when we talk about cost drivers, lack of scale.
It's a high number of school buildings. Portfolios.
Can I mention something that I think is not a cost driver? I
I
don't,
don't know, does that fall into the category of cost drivers?
Because it's being.
well, in the context of cost drivers, I don't think our universal meals program is a cost driver. And I think that when you compare the
All
amount,
right, I'm gonna put a pin in that. We're gonna put that under another category.
okay,
Things
but,
that are in the ed fund that maybe don't need to be in the ed.
okay.
I think you can put buildings and districts.
Scale.
You can put districts in this use. All
I wish I was confident.
Could we subset scale, like?
Yes, we will
Yeah.
subset that.
Yeah, okay.
I'm gonna bring up one, so we currently spend $70 million in extraordinary special education costs. That's for 700 kids. A lot of that is out of district placements.
Yeah.
You know, the kind of things that we are seeing BOCES try to address and may see address in the learning consortium that we heard.
I would say not just under number of buildings, but the age and construction needs of our buildings.
So, yes.
So speaking of sort of extraordinary costs for special ed, can someone remind me, do we have sort of a report or like a preliminary data set that would help us wrap our head around like what that looks like, what it means? Is that something we've had from previous years or something we could get?
Whether we can get testimony, whether we can get numbers and like where are kids going, we could ask AOE for that as a data request. You
Yeah.
want to refine that data request, give it to Annie,
Sure.
and she'll send it to AOE.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, yeah, maybe not even the where is important, but also just that, how much, like
Right.
how many students and how much.
From what I've heard, it's $70 million, 712 kids
Okay.
qualify for extraordinary special education.
Oh, that's extraordinary. Under
But I
the,
think
okay.
that the second where, because there's probably also a therapeutic schools kind of thread here, like how those are serving in this
Mhm.
cost there,
Out of
where
district.
they're physically located.
Yeah.
So,
And then this will be followed with, what can we do about it?
Right.
And then healthcare.
I was
Yep.
just gonna say insurance.
Healthcare and mental health clinicians for.
Health.
youth.
Well, let's separate. You're talking
Yeah,
about
I'm-
healthcare premium costs. healthcare
Yes,
premium
I,
costs.
I guess this, like, to me, it falls under cost, but I don't know if it's cost drivers, but something I heard from a few schools that I went and talked to school boards about was their capital funds, because there are some of them that will likely get closed and could get closed, and they have done well at saving capital funds to take care of their buildings. That's the community gave them the flexibility to work.
State gave them.
State gave them, but their community feels they did. Said,
Hey, wasn't that my money?
State funded it.
so the state continues to hold them.
Well, no, it's.
no, it's local, yeah.
What if the school
I mean,
goes
you're talking
away?
about funds that they've built up
But-
through surpluses.
Yeah, and so what happens?
Or
when
dedicated
schools close? Does the community retain those funds, or does it go to the new district? Or that's just how it answers the question that I'm gonna have to
Jump
go
in here,
and
Kate.
return to somebody this weekend.
They,
To add to our list,
Cost
so these are
drivers.
cost
yeah,
drivers.
I'm thinking about, and I don't know if I'm using the right word, but procurement, like how we heat, what internet we use,
Oh,
buying curriculum books or whatever.
just fall under this, like, scale
Could.
that we're doing.
I don't know, I just don't think we've thought about it much or talked about it much, about buying these things.
Yeah.
You buy more projects.
But I don't want it to get lost in the idea. Sometimes when we talk about scale and number of buildings, we're talking about operating
Shared.
people. We're often talking about people. So to me, it's something different, like just figuring out
Right.
toilet paper.
Like hard goods.
It comes
for
all into the
education.
state and then somebody gets it out to all the different schools or something like that.
State could make it.
Well, we do something similar to that. We actually partner with
Why don't you put it
other
within the parentheses
schools
of
or other
understanding
districts.
procurement?
Yeah.
Buy fuel,
In Vermont.
and we buy
Right,
it.
and I would
then-
think that fuel like thing might have been covered by a BOCES before we decided we were gonna throw everything out the window and start fresh. So, but yes, that idea
I
of
like-
buying fuel
Right, and
with
then-
other,
and
with
you get a
others.
discounted rate, and then it's like a pre.
By SU.
by SU. But even bigger, what if you were buying it for the whole
Well,
state?
So.
I know what you're talking.
So why don't we tackle these a little bit one by one? And why don't we start off with the big one, consolidation and our portfolio of buildings and all that. And let's talk about what the impediments that exist are that we could perhaps remove when it comes to the claim that we have too many school buildings for the number of children that we have. So if you would start at category 4, impediments to consolidation.
Can I ask a question before while she's writing that? Cost drivers, there's one that keeps popping up in my head that isn't a lot of dollars, but is potential to be a lot of dollars, I think. Maybe, I don't even know, because I don't know enough about the proposal, but the cost of tuition to independent schools is a lot higher than what we pay for public. And expanding that concerns me, and it could be, I live in an area of a lot of choice, and there are non-operating districts and districts that have both tuitioning and public schools. And when they lose control of the cost of the tuition, it means they're cutting way back on their elementary school to make up for it, to keep the tax rate. And I see that so often, and I just don't want to forget it and I don't know where it fits in any.
Well, so I would say, increasing cost of tuition, we're limited to independent schools.
I would-
We've seen areas where, it turned out to be frankly cheaper for some districts to send their kids over to Kimball Union Academy in New Hampshire because they couldn't pay more than the average house tuition. Whereas their
That's a-
closest public school was $20,000.
I hear you, but I think that example is a minority of the cost that we are seeing. I don't think, I think there's many more that are on the upper end as opposed to.
Yeah, well, and we have one school that meets EQS which removes any limits on what their tuition charges.
And I'm gonna say this only because there's a proposal to expand choice
Well,
to every
and
student in the state of Vermont. So I just want to make sure that we're not forgetting.
tuition is restricting on a local budget, even if it's not to an independent school, because for example, we have a union where I taught as a regional high school, but each town has to pay a tuition bill. And you have to pay that bill. So anything you want to negotiate in your elementary school, your money cuts have to come from
You
somewhere
have
else.
no maneuverability.
No maneuverability over that tuition bill, even to your own regional high school.
Sorry, didn't mean to throw us back.
So tuition. Okay,
Here-
impediments,
No, it's a-
cost driver.
It's a cost driver up
Increasing
above,
tuition.
blue.
impediments to the number of bills.
All right, so I'll just bring up one that, it's been mentioned to me, it's pretty controversial, but we currently have in pretty much every merged district, we have articles of agreement
Yeah,
that prevent
That's,
a school board from taking action
Yeah.
because it requires a town.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a real impediment to consolidation.
yeah, it is.
Agreed.
Yep, and hey, and just for the record too, talking to my superintendent down there at Taconic and Green, she says, I need a mandate. I have 3 elementary schools. I only need 1. Right? Like, but every time she brings this up, thoughtfully, logically, she gets roared down.
So I would call that local opposition.
that's local.
Yes. And they're in the articles of
Frankly,
agreement, right?
local
Kind of goes.
Control.
hand in hand.
Well, yes, but then there's just basic pressure, community pressure to not do it.
Well, we often say, I'm just gonna throw
Probably
it out.
happens. It's
We
probably
often
happens.
say local control doesn't really exist, but we have the option to be very control. We can control a lot. So local control does that. We just don't, is there, we just don't exercise it a lot. We exercise it in that example regularly.
Yes.
And the amount of people we hire and the number.
Right. I hate when people say local control is a myth because it's actually not true. We just don't use it.
I bet.
I would say another thing, geography. And, they said, there need to be some small schools because of geography, but I think that's an impediment to closing.
Would you make local opposition, or I would call it community pressure, a separate thing? Because I'd like to say, okay, what can we do about it? Each of those impediments, we as a legislature.
Yeah.
You can't change geography.
Good try.
So, are you thinking in the way that you're describing geography, that transportation time would go with geography?
Yeah.
As the same issue?
Also, not just transportation time, but there's that whole issue of being really close to the border. And is it gonna be an option to go to school across the river as opposed to in your, there maybe not be a school close to you in your future rural district. There's one 10 minutes across the river in New Hampshire or Massachusetts or New York or whatever,
Well, I think
or Canada, across the
Found
line in the
that.
district.
as we brought up those geographically unique situations, I think we heard from Secretary each time was, well, yes, there have always been exceptions.
Right.
So we just,
But how much?
there always will be. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just write geography. I don't think it's anything we can change.
Except through.
Well,
Except
We're
for
asking
exceptions.
impediments, and it is an impediment.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's appropriate.
All right, let's just for the ones we have now, let's talk a little bit about what we might be able to, what we as a committee might be able to do to address these cost drivers in the near term, as opposed to a bigger long range plan.
Is like a different delivery geographic places.
Well, so why don't we start to talk with scale? So we look at impediments and cost drivers and what we can do about it. So scale, the thing that keeps coming up is class size minimums.
Yeah.
So let's tag that.
You want another, this is what we're gonna do.
Well, or you could, it's not only like, but you could put the solutions of the blue things in red. Logo.
Can I talk about class size minimums? That would now be the point to say something about that. Okay.
Yeah.
So- In thinking about class size minimums, I'm also thinking about the way that we weight certain kinds of pupils when we talk about cost. And I feel like when we talk about physical bodies in the classroom, we need to sort of think along those lines in some ways about weighting pupils. Because like if you have a school where most of the kids have sort of like high levels of ACEs or come or are special ed students or come from poverty, that actually can in some ways affect behavior. I know this because I've worked in a really poor school for 10 years. And that's going to be a different 15 head count than it is in a really sort of rich community where say every parent is a college professor. And so I think that I don't know exactly how to do it, but I think something like that weighting needs to be taken into consideration.
Can't we just weight them the same
Or the same.
when you
but
count them in your classroom?
having 15 trauma kids is different than having
Sure.
It'd be
15
like
AP
30,
kids.
right?
Yeah.
Times 2, right? So yeah, whatever the weighting is.
Concept.
I like it.
Theoretically, doesn't we go to like the Ways and Means side of this, weighting
But it's more.
account for that theoretically, in the money or that currently the tax capacity that's available to a district. And thus could
Get the resources.
you know,
Due to the.
could say, okay, our AP classes are gonna have 25. And our strategic reader classes at Colchester are gonna have 14. And I assume this will be in a way that it's not gonna be like literally you must have exactly this many bodies in every room
It's an
every
average,
day, how that practicality works.
right? It's an average.
You know, it's an average, and
Yeah.
so isn't that also some sort of
Get some up, some down.
administrator, instructional leadership of saying, okay, these are all the resources we have, we should be running larger sections of these things, and we need to find a way to be strategic with our funds and our staff to run smaller sections of these things. Again, this isn't a super theoretical framework that weights are working about, but that's sort of the theory of
Right,
weighting,
I think you're right. Those
Right,
I-
and
I
that's
don't know.
what we should do,
If I could-
yes.
So let's not dive too deep into the
Yeah.
minutia of classes,
Right.
but that's a good point.
Yes,
And, you know, the idea with weighting is that we are resourcing that school sufficiently so that you can address that. So it almost becomes more about a number of adults.
Yes, that's what I'm saying, yeah,
Weight, the money, the finance.
Which is why ratios are scary.
yeah.
Yeah.
And, sorry, you go.
Because again, it's just what you said, right? Class size. How many kids are in the class? I'm not talking about teachers. Right? So you can have 30 kids in the classroom, 4 teachers.
Right,
Right? Like it's not saying, but like I'm just thinking out loud, right? Like that's a way to reverse engineer it for a 15 kid class. That's
Not always the way it works.
Well, it often becomes
but if they're
more of an issue when you have too many adults.
I know.
Too, so-
But now we
But
don't
anyway,
want, we also don't
we don't need to go down that road.
manage what a school does,
Right.
how much resources it has.
But we are by putting class size minimums if we put it in this context. That's all I'm saying.
Yes, I
just
don't
want
think
us
we're
to-
micromanaging to this extent of.
Not
I just
today.
want to keep in mind, I think your point.
if you really want to go deeply sort of down that road, you also need to think about other issues like who's the teacher on record? What does it mean to co-teach? What resources are we
Yes.
giving teachers
Yeah,
to
but again-
co-teach if they're running the same classroom?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question about class size minimums? Are we expecting, like we heard from the secretary this morning about, I'm gonna use my own word, exceptions to every rule? Is that what we're talking about here? Or we're gonna be talking about not recommendations? We're talking about minimums, period. And what happens in a very rural area? Are we going to have carpets? Just like we do on borders and all that
Right,
other
you don't
stuff?
have to figure it.
Yeah, I just wanna put it out there because the point is well
Right, how
taken
you
from the
are a
Northeast
geographically
Kingdom.
isolated school.
Yeah, I just,
Or very high needs.
in some cases, there might be about high needs, right? So we need
Okay.
parameters.
All right,
And do we go to, when we say districts, do we say districts of what, 2 to 4,000?
Oh,
well,
larger
What did
districts.
we,
the 2 to 4,000 is what the Superintendent's Association recommended to
That's
us
its ideal.
based on research that's been done in that area.
Okay.
We didn't talk about impediments to districts becoming bigger. But where we run into trouble, and we haven't, that we will need to talk about to solve is if you've got a supervisory union that you want to turn into a district. So it's under one board. But that supervisory union has non-operating, if you think of the White River Valley Supervisory Union, it's got non-operating districts, it's got hybrid operating districts, and it's got K-12 districts.
mine is all of it.
So you can't sort of like legally bring them all together because everybody's got something different.
So could a rule?
I'm using the word legally very generally.
Right,
Because we do have the option.
because you could change what the rules
Yes,
are,
that's-
right?
Yes.
But that is currently an impediment.
Yes.
To have different, but it's something the legislature might be able to do something about.
Because
It would take some powerful and controversial legislation.
Yes,
So is all of this.
Yeah,
Just,
right.
well,
shouldn't be afraid of.
class size minimums, maybe not so much.
I think you might be
EQS?
quite surprised. Just
Basically
saying.
eliminating choice, which is what you would have to do to make districts uniform.
Well, we could
Which
designate,
is a little, is pretty.
we could allow designation with it.
That's a little choice, yeah.
Well, it is, but it's still hard.
All right, let's talk a little bit about special ed extraordinary costs. It's it's kind of just a lurking issue out there, and there's not necessarily a real answer to it except to understand the problem better. And I think as we've seen with the Learning Consortium, really step into BOCES
yeah,
as a way to step up in district publicly operated special ed systems.
I just wrote turbocharged BOCES question mark. I mean, it's a scale issue too,
Yes.
right? You know,
It is-
everybody's
it
gonna
is
have
very
a
much a
handful
scale
of
issue.
extremely high cost students. You don't,
and
Right, if you only have one, you have really no choice but to have a district system.
Well, we also know that the percentage of students receiving special ed or special services are much higher in public schools than not. Eliminating the therapeutics. out of that.
so,
It's a
Well,
cost
and one
driver.
thing that I just wanted to add is why, we should also look into why do we have so many students identified for extraordinary costs?
Yep.
Is there, so when we're talking about extraordinary costs, is there, like, what is the funding landscape for that subset of students?
Shaky.
No, is it all state? Is it?
It's all state, but I think, the state gets money for special ed from Congress, but it's a state thing. So it was, Beth can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. But when we created Act 173, they created the census block grant for special education. We said, but we will still have a highly funded system that the state will take care of basically 95% of the cost of extraordinary
Extraordinary.
situations. So have we created an incentive to have more students identified as super high needs so that you can qualify?
So I don't know if this solution, if this is even relates, but does it come to some of this extraordinary special ed costs? Could also be relieved some by scale. We tried to have, as, in-district programs, so that students, we had special programs in my school that were for the entire district. If your district's larger, if you have more scale, can you have more of those in-house programs as opposed to
Well,
Goal
third-party
of 173.
When we talk about turbocharging BOCES, that's what we're really trying to do,
Right.
to create a vehicle for
Right.
scale. Like the learning consortium.
Yes.
Well, and you and I we had testimony that day, Chris, now I'm forgetting what. We were both very depressed afterwards. If it's felt like more and more districts are now creating their own in-house programs. For alternative, maybe I'm confusing, but like alternative programs to
Right.
be sort of fluid to move kids between. But if everybody's doing that on their own,
Right.
those are resources.
But it was a decision that was made under Act 173, and in our testimony, as you'll remember, Peter, where we know that kids are best served staying in their home district. So
Right.
programs were created, whether there's, we still have laws that we have to, federal laws
Yes.
we have to follow, but they're best served in their home school district. So
All right, I mean, it's not,
Okay.
it's not an easy one. The only thing I can really come up with is A, learn about the problem more, and B, really lean into BOCES as a way to try to bring those costs down.
I think that, also, just like universal meals, we also need to make some decisions at some point about how the ed fund is used for the mental health.
I was
aspect.
just gonna say that.
Like that, the other bucket now of like. Kind of,
Well, where I be, is that the weeds or?
where
is
the
that-
ed fund is money, like.
We can move on to ed fund. Now, I would just say, it's really easy to say, oh, let's move that out of the ed fund.
Right.
It's gotta go someplace. We don't really like raise our income taxes.
Doesn't go,
It doesn't reduce your cost drivers, it just
it
shifts.
doesn't,
the cost.
it disperses them.
But also, the way we operate, we need to find savings in the general fund to make do with the way that you wanna move it.
I mean,
Or, sorry.
I was gonna say philosophically though, it does give you the chance to weigh those programs in the context of other general fund programs, instead of saying we can only think about these things in the bucket of the education fund,
Education, yep.
where we know that we're gonna have to make hard choices that impact students.
Somebody was just saying the other day, I don't know if it was testimony or somebody at the table, they said they were talking to somebody, maybe it's you, Peter, or somebody, a friend from Hawaii who said that they don't pay healthcare out of their ed fund.
Oh, I don't.
I have heard that.
Somebody said that.
I didn't
Right,
do that.
but again, we can move whatever we want
We
out of the
can,
ed
but
fund,
we still have to pay for
You guys
it.
are gonna pay for it, right?
Yeah, but at least it takes the pressure off of like, this is our ed fund, it's teachers driving off the cost, let's hate on teachers, let's hate on schools. I mean, maybe people will support the schools. maybe.
So then under that theory, do we just get rid of the ed fund?
Well,
Well, that's a good
I mean,
idea.
sure.
all I'm trying to say is it
Yeah.
doesn't really matter as long
Right.
as we're, things are a target.
Well, one of the things that's been talked about is school construction. And
Well-
sometimes that's a separate stream than the, in some states.
Yes. And I think it would have to be here too, other than the bonded dollars.
Right.
But,
Yeah.
we didn't talk about that in terms of impediments to consolidation.
No,
Which is a huge
it's
one,
true.
which is a lack of a school construction program.
Sure is.
Mental health is,
Because I think it's hard to tell people to consolidate without them being able
that's
to
funny.
create something that they want to consolidate into.
Can I put early college
Yeah.
here? Like maybe a
CTE and early
program that
college.
we like and is very
Early
important
college.
about state colleges.
But no, but it's,
But is
is it an ed fund thing for early college?
Should we just fund the state colleges?
Should be saying
When you
I'll
say
let you register
mental, you put mental health costs there, are we saying just the cost of mental health, or are we talking about social services, period? In
What do
general,
you-
Oh.
I mean,
what do you mean?
I don't, I just feel like it's not, we're narrowing the label of what outside of education costs are, we're saying only mental health. I think there's a lot of other social services that we provide in our school districts around Oregon that can explain it more, but beyond just mental
We
health.
did
Mental
have
health is
analysis.
one of many.
Right, we did have analysis last year where they identified AOE and JFO identified $50 million increase in last year's budgets directly.
And I'm not arguing that point, but I'm just saying there's more in our budgets that are, that provide social services in our schools that isn't necessarily just that.
We can help social service, flash mental health costs.
I think that we could also think about saving money on mental health costs. Besides just thinking about the money, think about the drivers of mental health and lack of mental health and what changes we could make. And this is a very big, broad statement, but like what changes we could make, like the cell phone bill or like more outside time, the way that we do things, the way that we support families that maybe are not how do I say what I'm saying? Cost related, so not just reducing the amount of money because of the amount of need, because we're making everyone better. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Okay.
Yes. It's just hard to.
So let's just do that.
Hard to quantify. Let's just cure everybody of their ills. We didn't talk about healthcare costs. Because it's just hard, you know, we are a very expensive state for healthcare costs. We can almost only talk about it exclusively in, let's reduce the amount of healthcare we're providing.
Yeah.
Can't do that.
Or change to universal healthcare.
Well, and it's also fair to say, let's just call that out of our realm of expertise.
Yeah.
And we do know that the healthcare
Yeah.
committee.
We can identify it as a challenge.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, you know, if we were to kind of take this exercise and turn it into legislative language, what might we think about and say? So let's just take an easy one. If articles of agreement are an impediment to consolidation, I think we can wave a magic wand and eliminate articles of agreement. That the portions of articles of agreement that prevent.
But another,
So I'm just saying, you know, here are some things we can think about creating language towards as immediate steps to move towards a more scaled school system.
Because regardless of how it turns out in the end, that is something that needs to happen again, anywhere.
Yeah.
but is that the answer to the challenge? Or are we talking about the clean slate that we had, and are we talking about just redrawing lines and merging districts? The articles of agreement would go away.
Yes, I guess.
Yeah,
So I'm just
Well,
trying
so
to define.
we are at a point, because we have a timing issue, and we've got a legislative, a group of this, I think the entire group of, as we call the legislature, wants to take some action this year on things that we can do. I'm not saying that we ignore what has been presented to us, but I think we can view it in a longer term scheme. But we also can't guarantee that we're even going to go to 5 districts and rewrite from scratch. So
I'm
therefore,
not talking
what
about
I'm saying is that we need to be thinking of working within our educational ecosystem that we have today, and what can we do? We're really, just as we talked in our conversation with the administration, we got two paths. They're going to run parallel for a while until we decide that they merge, or they split apart, or one falls away.
Right.
And so I think what we need to be saying is, on the path of working within today's world, articles of agreement are an impediment to closing schools.
I'm in agreement with articles of agreement, are impediment to closing schools, but when I look at that impediments to consolidation list there, I would say only one of them wouldn't be eliminated by redrawing district lines. I'm not talking about the 5
Okay.
districts, but I'm talking about whatever we decide would be the right thing. Articles of agreement would go away, community pressure will always be here, but geography even should be addressed by that.
Are we sure?
Mixed delivery, the lack of instruction.
But we have not talked about.
I'm just saying, if we're gonna talk about writing legislation, that, are we gonna hit every one of those individually, write legislation, or? are we
That's,
just gonna do
that's
that?
the question. I mean, we can only take them on individually at the moment. I
Right.
mean, are you suggesting that we start bigger and say,
Guess I'm suggesting we continue with the exercise as opposed to getting down into the, let's write legislation to get started.
well, I'm just saying things that we can do. We're trying to make we're trying to compile a list of things that could go into legislation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we sure that redrawing the lines will erase articles of agreement?
Well, I think if
Should
we go about it
phone
from,
a friend?
well, I'm just saying, if we go about it to rethink our education system, we have a clean slate. We've been told that a bunch of times.
Either way, we're still talking about it.
Yes,
Yeah, either way.
yes, agreed.
Look at that, we all agree.
I agree that no matter what, just redrawing district lines doesn't necessarily reduce your portfolio of school buildings.
That's
So
true.
articles of agreement is an impediment, whether there's 5 districts, 25 districts, 119 districts.
Well, articles of agreement are
They're illegal.
are among
Contract.
Yeah.
districts.
Right.
Mhm. I don't know how many there are.
But I would say no matter what we do,
Something.
if we redraw, then they cease to exist, or we remove them if we're staying within the system that we have. And I guess I'll bring up sort of the bigger idea that I just keep kicking around in my head, which is to say, I think one of the impediments to consolidation, when you talk about community pressure, and all the things that go along with it, is that continued, we need the legislature to tell us who should be open and who should be closed. So do we create a body that sits down with maps and data and all of that and makes a recommendation for the legislature to redraw lines or collapse districts so that schools can combine? That all I'm saying is just this is one tool that could do that. And it could also act as the advisory commission for school construction, because I think we at least have full agreement that consolidation doesn't really happen a school construction program.
Are we saying that we need the legislature to decide which schools should remain open and closed, because that would be easier for like superintendents and principals and school boards? Or are we saying it because we think that that would be more satisfactory to the people of Vermont? Because I'm not totally sure that some of the people in Vermont won't riot if we say we're
So I
gonna
would
make a legislature.
say the first part of that more than the second.
Okay,
And it's still about district lines, not about portfolio buildings at that point, right?
Well, I mean,
What we're talking
in
about.
my head,
That's the first
that's
step.
just me, as one member of 11 here. I see it as buildings.
How did you phrase it yesterday? Base closure?
Yeah, basically
Commission.
similar to the Federal Base Closure Commission, where it's a nonpartisan group of people with expertise making the decision, using data and maps and all of that.
Linking it back to the governor's proposal, that proposal is based on the same portfolio of schools that we have now, without any closing of schools.
Correct.
I mean, on the other hand, though, I think it's kind of frightening the way they phrase it in here, because they're clearly wanting to reduce the number of schools, but they're letting them eat each other, rather than somebody, being the adult in the room and saying, either we're getting a commission together, or we know from our consultations with all the districts that this is how they would go if they didn't have articles of agreement. This would be the new regional middle school. This would be,
But
right?
when
I
you-
mean,
But when you write, when you operate those 5 districts, the articles of agreement aren't there.
oh, right, they're nothing, right?
I mean, you're
Right,
one
but-
district,
but
so.
the-
So that means the board could then make the decision that a board could today without the impediment of articles of agreement.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So to your point, which is that it doesn't envision any change. What it does envision is a funding formula that is based on scale. So, but it does also have weights for small schools. I'm not quite sure how that all fits in.
But
What are
it's
the
still
existing
setting,
weights?
it's still setting up a system to make that change, right? I mean, there's a single board for each of those 5 districts, 5 people, part-time. Those folks have the authority to close those schools, and that has been a goal, it sounds like, of scale, building scale from the administration. I think that's what their expectation is, even if they're not saying it, like.
Right, yeah, I think that is the expectation because the funding won't really support.
And there's no local control around getting away either.
I think that's been the goal for a
Yeah.
long time. That's
Yeah.
why we've had all these different acts and different trying to. I don't think it's changed due to this proposal.
Should be very
It's
honest
always
about
been that factor.
Well, yeah, it's been the method that we've been using, essentially of like trying to kind of prompt and prod school boards into making these decisions by incentives or disincentives or funding changes or Act 46. And it hasn't really done much.
Okay, things we can do. EQS,
Yes.
I've heard a lot that that's where that should be housed, but what is our role? We don't make the rules, right?
That's right. So,
District.
well,
quality standards and
EQS is there.
and that's where it'd be.
we had Beth talk to us a little bit the other day about how DQS
Yes.
could be used
The
in terms
vehicle.
of scale as a vehicle. for School size, class size.
DEQ.
The DQS,
He's,
not.
he's talking about DEQ.
Right, the DQS, not the.
DQS, I think would. If you look back at the superintendent's policy brief that we received, I think EQS was really where class size minimums.
That's what I was wondering, because that's been mentioned by some people that have come in, but I may be confusing DQS and EQS. As being a vehicle for change. Yeah,
But when we look at cost drivers and then ed fund issues, we can call what's in the ed fund a cost driver. If it's something that isn't, let's call it necessary or deemed necessary. Some people believe universal school meals are not necessary. I might just say that we've always provided school meals. So we just moved all that out of the individual budgets and put it at the top of the ed fund.
Transportation doesn't require either,
like,
but we do it.
Is early college, it's not an entitlement. It's something we just offer and it costs us a lot of money. It's an important revenue stream for the state college system. But it's the kind of thing where you can say, well, we're just not gonna do early college anymore because guess what? We have an affordability crisis. We promised Vermonters we're going to get a handle on what we're spending.
And if I could also, the third one, which is we have a pre-K-12 education system and early college is after that. I'm more than happy to consider, adding 2 years of associate's degree for if we want, but that's what we're talking about here. Where when we're talking about universal meals and we're talking about transportation, those other things, that's still within the pre-K-12. This is not with pre-K-12.
Right, and so we could say that we believe early college is an important
Yes,
program of the state, but we're not
but
funding
we
it out of
can't fund it.
we're not funding it out of the education fund, the legislature has to make a decision. And,
option.
what's that?
It's an option.
And if it is an assistance to the state college system masquerading as an educational program, then we could also just be able to say we're gonna give the state college system $4 million out of the general.
Mhm. Yeah, right.
So that's just sort of
Reality.
a lot to think about. It is an extra. And it is an extra that has repercussions. so it's got some, obviously got some benefit as well.
But as somebody pointed out, so many of the schools have dual enrollment as well, so the kids get exposure to early college without that. program.
Credit,
Yes.
early college credit.
I think that's fair to say.
Right, with dual enrollment. Yeah.
And dual enrollment is not a replacement for your senior year of high school.
No,
There's
right.
the option
No,
of-
it's a bonus.
It
It's just a
literally
bonus,
is getting held.
Yeah, right. But it's not
an
early college.
Anybody want to change geography? Can I, so,
Yeah, let's
so
change
would
geography.
you all please act as a check on me? This sort of base closure idea, am I just like off the rails on this?
No.
No,
don't
I
think so.
like it.
I mean,
But to-
I think
one of the challenges in all of this is that, like, what are you working towards? And I've had this conversation, you know, with people in Leoning, I'm in a big suburban district, but this conversation with people in parts of the state that close schools, and it's a loss. It's like a death of sorts, you know, it is a cultural community kind of death. And so to the extent that you can, you know, do that with dignity, that you can plan for it, that you can have some kind of the way the council of rural development comes in and helps like a community sort of envision what is their future, what are their assets, you know, what you might want to do to sort of find other ways, either physically to use a building or just culturally to be a community still that's different than when you had that school there that's been there for 100 some years. And so is that, and some of this is probably not education spending either, like this is community development stuff, this is
Oh.
economic development stuff, it's housing, but it's the, how do you do the hard thing and also help put a community on a path to, you know, some healing and something else.
So we've talked about a number of things here. One, as part of a school construction program, offering basically just grants to communities that need to re-envision
But I
themselves.
don't know that's, I guess that depends how we fund school construction, but that's
Yeah.
putting us right back in the ed fund issues of like, we're talking about like the state's economic development, community identity, super important things, but if we call it ed spending.
Well, I
No,
think it
that's
would be
not what
general
else. Yeah, that's not what I was.
I think it would be part of that sort of seed money that is general fund dollars. I would also just offer this as a thought. That when we do talk about, we could create a base closure commission and define their goals any way we like. We could say, and you are only to look at middle school and high school. Understanding that the small elementary school at this point is a community asset that people feel very. And if you combine that with class size minimums, that then also leads to some policy changes where a set of small elementary schools relatively near to one another might say that school is going to be 1, 2, that school is going to be 3, 4, 5. But we're going to have half the number of teachers doing that that we had previously. Yes.
Couple, I guess, questions, clarification. The base closing commission. This is separate than the district size and lot,
That's what I'm just, I don't know.
right?
Is that the one that's also figuring that? That's my question.
Would we ask them to
That's
propose
my question.
2 to
Because
4,000?
Because then if you're doing that, you're pushing anything we do off at least a year.
Oh, yeah.
Because,
Okay,
right, and then that whole foundation for everything's tied into the district size, as far as I've heard.
Right.
Could be different. So that was one thing. The other thing is, who's gonna actually wanna serve on a commission that's gonna tell people that?
All right, well, first of all, let's be clear. I think it's your first point is excellent, and let's remember that. 2, we would still have to make the decision.
Right.
They would make a recommendation to the legislature.
And then I absolutely love Rep. Brady's idea, if I'm getting it right, that if we do come up with a commission, which could be a part of this whole process, even after district lines and as any proposal goes forward, to have a commission looking at this kind of stuff, also envision and help the community with what they can repurpose that asset into, right? And that, I love that idea.
So when we sort of, the legislature, those of us organizing this legislative session, said, okay, how are we gonna tackle this? that issue in particular came up, and that has been assigned to the Commerce Committee. So to sort of start thinking about that.
Replace for
So
But it
lovely
will
hearing
take
too. This is a lovely piece. First
I
thought-
know.
First I thought this is
Where's
just
it
in my
going?
head. Can you hear it too?
No, there's nothing I can,
But it will take resources, I mean,
yes,
cost for like even closing things is going
right,
to do
Right.
it well is also gonna cost some
right. If you.
money. So
even-
if we're all kind of honest with each other and our constituents about the reality here, you know, if we can't just shutter a bunch of buildings and, you know, throw a lock on the door and we've saved money, I mean, you're gonna have to repurpose, you're gonna have, setting
Oh,
aside
bulldoze.
the cultural and identity things,
Yeah.
so
You
there's,
just part-
there's
part-
cost in this, yeah.
Need to partner with you guys
Yeah.
on this whole process.
And I just want to be clear, I think that a base closure commission needs to have at the top of its list of guiding principles, expanding opportunity for kids. You know, and I
Oh, yeah.
think about that, you know, larger, particularly high schools offer more opportunities for kids.
It doesn't make sense to do the commission after the lines are drawn. For whatever those lines are,
Yeah.
because then they're gonna
Who's
work.
drawing the lines?
I think that's where we're stuck.
Well, I'm saying, because then what they'll do is they will look within those lines and make decisions instead of as a statewide decision, because like that may start guiding some of their decision as well. I have this block of land with these many schools. This is what I'm gonna work with in this.
I love the legislature. I would call us ill-equipped
Well, you have people,
to start to draw lines from scratch as opposed to
and I guess
setting up a group of experts to do it, to make a
that might be a
recommendation.
different group of people, the same that are gonna talk about schools, not the commission on base closures, but the commission on district lines.
My,
Because that would be quicker. And then the other one can be a longer process after.
brings me back somewhat to geography, and I think my concern would be you have to do them at the same time. You have to consider what your portfolio of school buildings is, so that within your districts, you draw lines that have high schools and middle schools and.
But you
So
maximize the existing.
right.
infrastructure,
I think you have to
knowing
kinda do
you're
it
gonna have
together.
to build some new or some retrofitting, but you know, yeah, your lines are acknowledging the current reality and maximizing our infrastructure that still has any life left in it.
I think it's,
So that's what I get stuck on. Are these, is this commission doing or whatever?
I think another impediment to school closures is you articulated it perfectly, that there's a perception, and I'm gonna call it a perception intentionally, that kills a community, it destroys a community. And I would love to know, because I've experienced a school closure in a community, a very small school in a very small community in my SU. And that wasn't the outcome, but that was the fear. And I would love to know if there's been other small schools that have closed. And I just think that, you know, as we're working forward with all this, no matter who is base closing commission or whatever, we actually need to be talking about reality and how we overcome that perception. And that goes along with, how do you create community? It's not about your school. How do you create community? What we're talking about, the Commerce Committee working on, and how helping communities repurpose their buildings or tear them down and, you know, create something new. Because I have a front page of my local paper today was a plan that included the closure of a school that the community just closure and use of the space, the land, not the building, of the school that the community just voted no to close. Right, so these conversations are ongoing, and if that plan came to fruition, if they thought that they could do, the vote would have been quite different. But there's goals in every community of building community. I think we just need to find a way to build that, as opposed to the fear.
Okay, how do we do that?
That's your
I mean,
job, Peter,
oh,
your chair.
We were doing
that
that
Just
today.
kidding.
No, but
I
I
don't-
don't, to me, it's like,
I think it's
we
terrible.
aren't capable of doing that. What we are capable of doing is providing the resources for a community to do that on its own.
But it is our job to be careful about how we talk about school closures here.
Messaging.
I think it's really important that we acknowledge that there is fear out there, but that we're gonna, I think we really ought to have this conversation with the Commerce Committee or whatever, because I've watched this unfold. I brought this up the other day, yesterday or whenever it was, for a reason. It is a huge impediment.
Right. But if we're trying to achieve scale, and we achieve scale by not having as many school buildings, I mean, there's a certain amount of Band-Aid ripping off that has to happen.
Right.
I mean, I think it's gonna be hard to solve for loss without providing opportunity for gain. But I'm not sure we can tell a community how it is gonna feel better about itself.
We can talk about it different, and we can also talk about what your suggestion was, which was, do we provide a certain number of dollars for a community who's going to close their school to get themselves started on the next phase of their
I would
lives?
say absolutely. Question.
So that is real. That's what we can do. That's one thing. Could.
I wanna push on your base closure, your BRAC here.
Yep.
Philosophically, I hear it, I like it, I think we even talked about it in this committee last year. But then I also hear and fear, okay, we know that the problems, we've known many of them a long time. We're now creating another group to make decisions that just have to get made. One, what is how much further out does that push the timeline? And how much, and the perception of
I
that.
am so open
Real-
to alternative ideas.
I know,
Maybe we are
So
those
lay it on
people.
me.
it has to stand it up tomorrow
Just do it.
by fiat. They have 1 month locked in a room. No, I know, but yeah, like there's that expediency thing that.
Yep.
I don't think necessarily the commission that you're talking about, base closure, necessarily has to push the timeline out. I think if there's a way that we can come up with the districting and still start to move forward, I think this can come into play even after, or kind of simultaneously. Because then they can go in and they can start making some decisions, and kind of looking at the broader picture, but
So then back to Bethany's, which is the one I'm so sorry, who draws the lines? Who's deciding? The district boundaries?
Well, so let's,
we've got some.
the question I always have to ask as chairs, who do we need to hear from to answer some of these questions?
Right.
Well, we need
Alright.
to, wouldn't we need to know where all the schools are, what the school
You got the
populations are,
portfolio.
right?
Now-
In
now
addition
we
to the
can do-
buildings.
That we are doing.
And we have some proposals out there,
We do.
right? We have some possibilities, we have county lines, we have CTE lines, we have
Right.
all sorts of, so we do have some that we can start looking at and trying to formulate some decisions.
Yeah,
Can I ask,
Agreed.
can I ask
Twice.
along the lines of that?
second.
What-
Starts tomorrow.
In the spirit of open discussion, what people's feelings are about sort of district size and that, like Picus numbers are modeled on districts of about 3,900. I think I read through that report and it says the average district in the United States today is like 3,710 students or something like that. We have some research that Chelsea shared of, sort of where your efficiencies are and then where you start to lose efficiencies. The current reality we live in of what size districts are, like. In my mind, I'm feeling fairly comfortable with the concept of most of our districts being at least 2,500 up to, great, we could get to 5 or 6 in a couple places, and that makes sense maybe, but in that range, but that's what's in my head, and so I kind of wonder what's in all of our heads about size. Of course, the boundaries matter and where they are, and it shouldn't, I don't think we arbitrarily do it, because it's like, we have to have that many kids in it, so we
Right.
try to squiggle a little bit more this way, and
Well,
we do some things that make sense. on the
Guiding
ground.
principle, that's supposed to.
But, Yeah. And so I wonder, because there's, that to me is a bit of a middle ground between where we are now and 5 districts that have been proposed and one that's particularly large.
So many of your districts, in your region are gonna be not changed all that much, but
Maybe.
districts, and I'm saying
Yeah.
many may not change. But I can tell you that will significantly change some more rural
Yeah.
districts
Yeah.
in the state.
Well-
And so I just want to make sure that we're thinking.
I'll dive in on my gut feeling, not having all of the information. Cause I go back. when I
Legislated by gut.
You know, go back to what I said a long time ago, if the overall vision for Vermont to solve our problems is to change our demographics, and we want young families with children to move in, you need to have some growth room in your districts. You know, if you set your districts at 20,000 kids and all of a sudden people flock to Vermont, you know, so around that 5,000 range in my head right now kind of makes some sense because you could grow a bit more.
It seems to me
You know,
that
maybe.
seems to me that the policy brief we got from Superintendent Association and PICUS almost line up. Both based on research in that 2 to 4 or 2,900.
39,
Yeah.
3,500.
Yeah.
And then you could expand a little bit as people
Yeah.
moved in.
Could absorb all of that.
Well, that's what problem we want to have, right?
So it'd be like for the 4,000, I think we figured out the other day, it's about 21 districts. But when moving forward with testimony, I think I heard from the secretary and deputy secretary that they can model
Yes.
some numbers for us, right? So what I would like to see, because our district sizes is going to affect everything else that this proposal that we're gonna have to decide a lot of stuff on affects everything that. So what I'd like to see is I'd like to see, they've obviously given us the 5 district model. Right? I'd like to see the some of the other size, like 25, the 20, the 21. I'd like to see, you know, county, what it would be for county districts, what it would be for the 20, you know, some of the other proposals that we've seen,
Okay,
and how that affects everything else that they've got.
We have a Shark Tank pitched, everybody
Well-
comes in, proposes their district.
exactly. I keep saying, okay, are we then gonna take that information and do something with it? In the short amount of time that we have, or
I'm with
is it
Kate.
better done by
Do it.
somebody else?
I'm with Kate and Josh.
Which
Yes,
is,
just do it.
we gotta continue.
Yeah, I
With the
think,
Band-Aid.
and I think that I'm not ready to say we're gonna put this out there personally.
Yeah.
For
Let's
district.
do it.
Go.
Let's
Which
do it.
would, which would.
I'm sorry, you pushing back against my base closing commission?
No, I said it fits in
We
the
just have to do it in a
model.
week.
I
That
like
comes
your-
out.
I like your base.
But like, you know, like there's the, what is it, the 11 districts that's part of the school board. Is that correct?
SBI region.
Which are all relatively the same size, but I mean, so that might be the smallest one. That
They used to say 20 years.
So-
ago.
So we have time to just relax before the floor.
Get there on time to get your gold star.
I just want to say, Friday,
Yeah.
by the way, we have testimony coming in about another state and how they went through redistricting.
Nice.
Part of the state.
What state?
But,
Montana.
so
Does mean,
Gotta make it bigger.
given what you all have said, who can we hear, who can best be sitting up there to help guide us?
That'd be the JFO since that have the ability to input and change the data.
So what is it, what is the input, what is the output? And is the input to say, what does it look like for 14 districts?
And then what does that look like for a foundation formula on the back end, right? Because those two beginnings.
That pre-assumes a foundation fund.
But just saying, like, because if everything's based off of 5.
Right.
Right, you would in theory put the number in for 22 and then everything would shift accordingly.
I get a little concerned about analysis paralysis when
Yeah.
and sort of say to ourselves, and this is me being like, no data, I don't need any data, to know that if we have scale and fewer people, we're gonna save money.
So trying to.
But that's a gut, that is legislating by gut as opposed to.
and that is not necessarily reality.
But so if we were to bring in JFO and say, what if we did this many districts or districts of this size, we'll say, how does that affect the foundation formula numbers? Well, which foundation formula, first of all? We're working with 3. We got the AIR, the APA, maybe just those 2.
I wonder if it might be helpful to hear from some of the really smaller people who are in the school communities that we're gonna decide for them that they're closed, like things like select board chairs or principals of our smallest schools, or I don't even know how you would do this, but parents.
So I would say we have to, number one, but number two is, does that not happen until if we go with the base closer commission, they give us a report where that we have to vote on. Is that the time that we do that as opposed to early?
Community engagement.
Maybe
process.
unless that is too late to realize that, wow, this was not as good an idea as we thought that it was going to be. I'm not quite so convinced that telling people we've made the decision for you really is gonna go well for us.
May not.
Oh, it's not going.
It won't.
It's not gonna
No,
work.
There's no question it won't.
But
It
yes,
is
no
going
movement will
it
happen.
is going to be extremely painful and it is going to test our courage.
I take your point on the analysis.
It's not original.
No, but could we at least get, like,
Yeah.
could we at least say, like, counties?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
County or
Or another
CTE.
model, just to see.
So
the var-
I, in that case, I would say, if
Excuse
folks
me.
would sort of go away tonight,
Go away.
tomorrow, come back and say, so, county has a bit of a challenge because county lines cut up school districts that currently exist.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the VSBA lines do. I think they may hold school districts together, but that's another thing.
And what's that?
Would,
11?
I don't know.
Yes.
They hold SUs together.
They hold issues together. So would people like that as a starting
Well,
I believe
or
it's 11.
is there any benefit to looking at the CTE?
or CTE?
So that you have a CTE in every district?
Important.
I know there's issues about
Yes.
CTE funding.
Yes.
So
And
Chip,
it's like 17.
I think that
That
this
needs
is
to be
a
sorted out.
conversation either we all have to have or like that we need to have with Ways and Means.
Yeah.
Because they've been digging deep into that foundation formula that's been proposed, what the assumptions are and what the
We never
outcomes.
had the model.
And so we're kind of,
we're starting off on our own.
we're
here.
going off on our own
Yeah.
here and
That-
obviously it's, the model's built on governance things, but there's also a lot of other assumptions in that model that may not, some of us may not agree with, it may not be attainable against the current reality that would require other changes beyond just districts. So I think, to me, this is, I'm not sure if it's testimony so much as we gotta see where they are and
Right.
understand better where they are on
Struggling.
Because
the process.
do we know? Do we know if they, or should we ask them if we don't know that if they have had a new modeling or remodeling done?
I will
Yeah, because I think they're
answer
gonna-
these questions. I'll have an answer for you tomorrow.
Because I mean, they may have already done exactly what.
I'll take your question and your question and find get an answer for us.
We should probably all develop buddies on that, so we should have like assigned partners.
Ways and Means, buddy. I have
I already
that.
have one.
I have one. Mine's still
I would just
here.
say attack any Ways and Means Committee information that you want.
Yes.
Have they given
I
a
think it was
budget,
correct.
buddy, and then?
Annie, do we have free time tomorrow?
Yes.
What time? What's our first block?
11:30 a.m. and then have
All right, 11:30, we will continue this conversation. Hopefully, everybody, if there is information you can pursue on your own between now and tomorrow, please do. Don't be afraid to ask the people we often see sitting in the room for help with that. So for example, if you're like, let's look at the VSBA numbers. Somebody please say, hey, could you send us a copy of your how many students?
I've already done
Great.
that. We have the map and I have the numbers.
If anybody has mapped
Of just your-
CTE
VSBA.
regions, they can get their hands on it. We could ask Annie to see if that exists. All right, so maybe start printing these out, laying them out. But again, I will just say that I get a little concerned that in our rush to do a job and get out of here and answer Vermonters' concerns all by the end of May, we don't do good work. But I'm happy to go down this path. So that we get a better sense of challenge.
I'm sorry, there's so many educators around this table. There's no way we don't do good work.
I just tell me, do we have the time to do it?
I'm gonna agree with you 100% on what you said about the timing. And then I would also say that while we're approaching this challenge that we've got in front of us, aren't we placing the needs of students first?
Yeah.
Or are we placing the cost savings that we anticipate? I'm hearing it in the room that we think, and I say that with, we think, well, that tackling these cost drivers will lower costs, and I have no way of believing that at this moment in time. So I just want to make sure that we're very clear as we're moving forward, that why we're going forward. I know we keep saying
There are
student
cost drivers that if we had the power to reduce, would save money. If we could reduce
Well,
the cost of healthcare, we
Absolutely.
would save money. If we
Well,
could reduce the cost of
but
special
that's
ed.
without our control on the healthcare thing. But special ed, a little less so, because we've already done some work there. But I'm just gonna go back to, well,
The scale.
closing, I think closing schools, the assumption is we're gonna save money and we're gonna lower our staff. That was not my experience when in my, just speaking personally, in my district, when we said we were gonna close 2 of 3 elementary schools, we did not reduce staff. Maybe by 1 person, because we couldn't. And that if we were gonna provide the same education in a single building, and
lose the two schools.
you'd be surprised at how little we saved. And I'm not trying to say there wasn't savings, there will be savings, but I thought there was gonna be lots of savings and there
So
was
is this
minimal
an
savings.
argument for going down this path?
No, it's a reality that I want us to, if we're going to go out there and say, we're gonna do this and it's gonna save us money, then I think we need to know that. We absolutely need to know that. And I don't think that we do yet. And I think we haven't heard that from the administration on their proposal either.
Well, their proposal is based on a foundation formula that is based on scale.
Sure.
And whether.
So-
And,
which is
but
the
it's,
same thing.
but it's more on, yes, but it's more on bending the cost curve. And, because a lot of things they're putting in there
Yes,
are gonna cost more,
but they've already said it will save 130.
Should we,
180.
should we,
Hundred and eighty-three.
should we, maybe we frame our goals like this. We're working in concert with what our taxpayers want, what the governor wants to streamline our system and create a better educational opportunities for our kids, right? With that in mind, that's how we attack this, right? Because as we've said, a bigger high school means more opportunities for
Equity.
kids, right? I mean, all of
Better.
that. So we keep the kids at the forefront, but we say, we're going to work and we're going to streamline things.
And I just got the go-ahead today to teach 2 brand new statistics classes at U32. So I need more kids.
Be excited.
I am a little bit excited. Like I never thought they were gonna get approved. So I'm like,
We have an affordability problem.
Absolutely.
We need to be looking at ways to save money, and we can't shy away from that message.
Right. But
So
we say this is
I'm in
twofold.
agreement with you, but if we're gonna be asked to go make major governance changes, the folks who elected me and many of you are going to expect, if they're going to be asked to do the many things that we're talking about doing here, they're gonna expect to see lower costs. And now what we were told, and I'm being very specific about this, what we were told is we want our property tax rates to go down. That does not mean, lower costs. It means I want my property tax rates going down. I
Well,
can't
if-
interpret that
If
for
you
my
can figure out how to
constituents.
make all of that happen,
I'm
I'm
not,
totally open to suggestions.
I'm trying to be very realistic about how we move.
Yeah, but
Not
if we
suggesting one-
don't change anything, nothing's going to change.
Well, and there's also again, where not doing anything also has a cost, just leaving all of our, I'm under no illusion that we're gonna deliver some gazillions of dollars of savings. But the longer we operate with scale issues that we know, we have extensive testimony, are they there, we have some scale issues in our system. And I think that is just an undeniable reality, and we have, again, extensive testimony to that. And so also the longer that goes on, whatever the math term is, like compounding interest here, or those are, it's the bending the cost curve, because those costs are continuing to mount as well. It is
Not our
not
thing to do.
as, palatable and a political sales pitch, certainly as like, boom, a cut. but it's a reality and that's the hard job we have as the
More of a.
policymakers in this time, like the hard work they did on pensions. It's there are some of these things that they're not a clear, like, boom, here's your savings, but it's, if you don't, there's lots of other risks of just increased cost too.
So my point was not to say we shouldn't move forward. I want us to move forward with the correct goals that we all agree on and the reality of how we're going to have to message this and bring our communities on board. That's all I'm saying.
Right, but we need a clear and consistent message.
Yes.
We can't
That's
sit
what I'm
and
trying
say,
to say.
we want to achieve scale, but first we need to do, it's gotta be a little bit more, less equivocation. But I do think we could, I will go back to say, there are opportunities to do scale and improve opportunities.
And we should message it that way.
Yes.
That should be opportunities first.
Thank you all for a good,
Thank you.
very good discussion.
Yeah.
Hard discussion, it's gonna get harder,
Oh, yeah.
Yes, it is.
because we're not all. But we're doing pretty well so far. Let's hold there and get to the floor on time to get.